We have another key pillar to cover here at Amplify, and that is personal effectiveness. Now, I reckon it's safe to say we all have personal barriers. I know I do too, about the size of the Great Wall of China. But our next guest speaker is the author of a whole host of books on the subject. Now, I especially like the sound of, "You've got this." I'm sure we all have days when we need to repeat that particular mantra. Now, Margie Warrell is going to talk to us about being brave and courageous. As with our previous speaker, I'll link in at the end of her keynote and put some of your questions to her, or may squeeze a few of my own questions in. Margie has a lot to cover, so have a stretch, roll your shoulders back and focus, because this is going to be fantastic. Margie, hi, over to you.
Hey, good to be with you too, Nihal. Thank you so much, and hello, everybody. I'm joining you today from East Coast USA, so we're really spanning the globe. And it was fantastic just listening to Jitski then talk about collaboration and what it takes to build strong tribes. But of course, our ability to shape the tribe around us is going to be really impacted by how well we can manage ourselves and how we can amplify our own impact by managing our own mindset and managing the way we show up for other people. You know, successful companies, organizations do things that others don't. Adobe is out there as an extraordinary organization doing cool things, making a big impact. But successful people also do things that others don't. And of course, we as human beings, I like to think of us more as human becomings. We're kind of constantly on this journey. None of us ever fully arrive. Just when we think we've sort of shed some baggage from the past or, you know, broken through some barrier, psychological or otherwise, you know, we come up with another one. And it's because we humans are wired for safety, we're wired for comfort, we're wired for certainty. And no matter what it is we're dealing with throughout our lives, the desire for safety and for survival is always in this tug of war with the desire for growth and for learning and for connection. And so just recognizing that lives in you, and it always will live in you. It lives in me, it lives in all of us. That's why sometimes we go, oh, there's something I really want to do, but there's this other part of us that goes, oh my God, I'm terrified to do this. What if I fail? What if I make a fool of myself? You know, and we tend to get in our own way. It's why the biggest challenge any of us ever have when it comes to achieving what we want for ourselves is ultimately in our own thinking. It's never external, because if you get your head right, if you're focused in what you think and what you feel, what you do is really in alignment, then that allows you to deal with all of the challenges outside of you. So right now we're going to deep dive into what does it take for you to really amplify your power, to be fully empowered yourself. And I'm going to share with you a really simple little model, one that I draw on daily for myself, and I have over the years many times. So, okay, 3 parts to it. Firstly, what are you focused on? You know, what we focus on expands. Where you put your attention is where your energy goes. And yet we're wired to focus more on what's wrong and what's missing. We've all got a negativity bias. Kind of it's why we've survived so long, right? It's part of the survival instinct is to look for what's potential threats to my safety, my sense of security. But if you're focused on what's wrong and what you can't do, it actually takes away your energy, your creativity from what you can do. So that's the first one we're going to dive into in just a moment. Secondly, what's the story that you're living in? What are the beliefs? What's the mental map you've got about how to get from where you are now to where you want to go? Jitski just talked about tribes having shared stories. Well, all of us live in our own stories, and our stories either expand what's possible for us or they shrink it down. So we're going to kind of get you to just take a step back and go, where am I telling myself a story that's actually limiting the actions that I take, that might be fueling me to feel stressed out or anxious or isolated or disconnected? And what's another story I could tell? And finally, brave action. we're not wired to get out there and put ourselves out there. We're wired to only play it safe. We're wired for caution. We're wired to stick in our comfort zone. And yet you've heard the saying, the magic doesn't happen in our comfort zones. So let's get going and dive into focus. So I grew up in rural Australia. My dad milked cows for 50 years on a farm in southeast Victoria in Australia. I don't know how many Australians we've got on here, but you can probably tell that's where I'm from. And I remember we'd go out fishing in a boat on the Gippsland Lakes, and my dad would say, you know, boats don't sink because of the water around them. They sink because of the water that gets in them. And that's because our boat usually had holes in it, and he'd be plugging it while we were out there fishing. And so just recognizing that your circumstances, what's going on around you, and I'm guessing you've felt like you've been buffeted by some pretty big storm waves over the last 9-10 months. Most of us have. But what's going on around you doesn't have to determine what's going on inside you. You get to decide that. But part of what we have to do in order to decide that is just be really mindful of, well, where am I putting my attention? Am I focused on what I can't do, on what's wrong, who's to blame, on how it should be? Or am I focused on what I can do, on controlling the controllables and what I want? Lily Tomlin, the comedian, once said, I always wanted to be somebody. I should have been more specific. So I'd like you just right now to think about, and if you're in the chat function here, what are the attributes of the person you really want to be, how you really want to show up in 2021? What are the attributes that define how you want to be as a person, as a colleague, as a teammate in your tribe, as a leader? Is it resilient, determined, focused? I call them power virtues. And for me, every year I have a ritual where I say, you know, what are the power virtues? What are the attributes of who I really want to be and need to be this year to achieve what I want to achieve? Focus is a big one for me. Determined, sometimes tenacious, resilient, brave, assertive, collaborative. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love you to all kind of share with each other. What are the attributes that define who you want to be this year? I want to be, and just share that in the chat. So we often think if we could just have what we wanted, then we could, then we could be who we want to be. Well, actually, it works the other way around. Who do you want to be? Because that'll dictate what you do. And then that will impact what you have, what you create. But of course, it's really important not just to think about, well, where am I now, but where do you want to go? We've all come through a pretty stormy time, and we're not out of it yet, obviously, but I think that the light at the end of the tunnel is growing a bit brighter, that we are going to be able to look back on this time and bring it on. But as you think toward the future, what's a future that inspires you? What is it that you would really love to create, to do, to achieve? A few years back, it was coming up to my husband's 50th birthday, and we have 4 kids. And we said, what would be a cool thing to do for Dad's 50th? And one of my kids, Ben, said, I reckon it'd be really cool to hike Mount Kilimanjaro. We were living at sea level in Melbourne, Australia at the time. We didn't really hike as a family. We certainly didn't do so at altitude. But we set out. We were like, wouldn't that be cool? He did this whole PowerPoint presentation with Rocky soundtrack music, the works. And off we set to Tanzania, and off we set up Mount Kilimanjaro. At the time, the kids were 13, 14, 17 and 18. And, 13-year-olds, pretty big thing climbing a mountain like that. And on summit day, it took us 9 slow, grueling hours to get to the top. And I can tell you, we wouldn't have got there if we weren't pulling each other up. We all had to kind of dig a lot deeper than we wanted to. But we got to the top eventually. And it was the only time that day I said, guys, we've got to get a photo. And we snapped this photo. I can promise you that was the only smile that happened all day. It was grueling. But there was a lot of lessons we got from that climb. And that is that unless you're clear about what it is you really want, you can find yourself taking the path of least resistance. You certainly don't climb up big mountains. And so setting your sights on a vision that inspires you, focusing on what it is you would love to create and do, not on what you don't want, not on what you can't have, not on what you can't do, but on what you do want, holds power. It amplifies your power. It actually helps you go, I need to do more of this and less of this. And it really helps you dig deep in those moments when it matters the most. But you've got to get your story in the right place too. If we had told ourselves a story that, it's too hard, we're not a hiking family, our kids are just teenagers, this is all just too difficult, we would never have even set out. So I want you to think of a challenge right now that you're dealing with, or a challenging person, and I know you're definitely dealing with a couple of those too. And I want you just to think right now, what's the story I've been telling myself about this problem or this problem person? And ask yourself, how has that made you feel, that story? Has it made you feel frustrated, resentful, stressed out, anxious? And then what actions has that led you to take? Because emotions determine what we do, not logic, emotions. But what determines our emotions? The stories that we're living in. If I'm telling myself, oh my God, it's all so stressful, I can't do it, then, it's going to limit what I do, and I'm probably only going to create more and more stress for myself. So as you think about a challenge that you're dealing with right now, I ask you to think about, what's another story that I could tell myself here that would make me feel more optimistic, maybe make me feel more confident, maybe help me just stop feeling so resentful. Maybe there's a gift or opportunity in the challenge that you have. Maybe you've been telling yourself a story that you're a failure at something because you tried something and it didn't work out. In fact, so often we tell ourselves stories, we put labels on ourselves. I'm hopeless at this. I'm a failure at that. Or maybe about other people. It's impossible to deal with people like Nahal. They're just so difficult to deal with. I can never get anywhere with people like that. So just be mindful of how much your story creates a roadblock in your own head to actually collaborating more with people, to moving forward, to getting better outcomes, to getting out of your own way and taking the very actions that actually you're capable of taking. We shape our we shape our stories, and then our stories shape us. So be mindful of, what's that little voice in my head telling me? I know for me, growing up, one of 7 kids on a dairy farm, I had very much this, I'm not that smart, I didn't get that greater education, blah, blah, blah. We've all got that little voice in our head. And I remember at 18 going off to university. No one had gone to university in my family. It was actually a really big deal. It's not a big deal these days, but it was a big deal then in the environment, in that tribe that I was part of. And I had to literally defy the little doubting voice in the back of my head that I could get, a university degree. And of course, over the years, I realized you don't have to be that smart to go to university. and I'm sure you know that too. But so often we let that little doubting voice in the back of our head that's like, you can't do that. You're not good enough. What will people say? What if you fail? And we give that voice the power to run our lives. We let it call the shots. We let it sit in the driver's seat. So if you sometimes struggle with self-doubt, and particularly over the last year, when we are isolated from people, when we don't get the reinforcement, the touch points that help us remember, actually, I'm pretty good at this, that fuel our confidence. We don't have those coffee bar conversations as much, those transformative conversations that Jitska just referred to, that actually we can end up buying into stories and believing doubts and negative noises, blah, 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 in our head that actually aren't true. A very helpful technique I've found is to just give your doubt, that little negative noise in your head, that Debbie Downer, give it a name. And when you hear it, just say, I hear you, Debbie, or whatever. And no offense to any Debbies out there. But I just encourage you to realize that who you are is not the voice in your head. It's not your fears. It's not your doubts. It's not the labels you've put on yourself or anyone else. Third part of our pillar is around taking brave action. So as you think about where you are right now, your situation, the challenges that you're dealing with, some of the opportunities you've got as well, chances are that for you to amplify your impact, for you to do the things you want to do, for you to get to the top of your own Mount Kilimanjaro, whatever that is, I'm not saying, I've decided I'm never hiking another mountain again after that because it was took everything out of me. But we all get inspired by different things and we all want different things. But so often our fear of what could go wrong gets in the way of us taking the very actions to make things more right, from making changes, from taking chances. And our brains are actually twice as sensitive to potential losses as they are to potential gains. So when we think about doing something, we tend to focus more on what so many years of their lives in situations that don't make them happy, that where they're sort of settling. It's also why at the end of people's lives, one of the number one regrets people have is that they weren't as brave as they wish they were, that they have avoided taking risks, that they never spoke up, they never had the conversation, they never challenged the thinking around them, they never challenged their own, they got stuck in these limited mental maps. And so as you think about what it is that you would love to do or change, what is a vision that inspires you for this year and beyond this year, be willing to get uncomfortable. Your success in life, how much you amplify your impact, is directly proportional to your willingness to get comfortable being uncomfortable. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy. No, never said that. But I know myself, the more often I've just put myself out there and done the very things that I was kind of scared of, the more I've realized, you know what? I actually didn't need to be so scared. It wasn't that hard. Maybe I was that doubt that I had. And so for you, I just encourage you to think about what would you do if you were going to embrace discomfort? You're going to choose courage over comfort and lean toward the risk. I'm not talking about physical risks. I'm talking about emotional risks. I'm talking about that fear, that risk of vulnerability, of being exposed as not good enough, as not smart enough, as not creative enough. You're in a creative organization and often we go, oh, I have to be brilliant. It has to be genius-like before I suggest this or try this. And that's not true. The more you lower the bar of having to be brilliant, genius, extraordinary, the more actually it gives you permission and freedom to try things, to put yourself out there, to come up with new ideas, say, hey, what about this and what about that, to have those transformative conversations. So for you, if you were being brave right now, what's something that you would be doing? What's a conversation that you might have that perhaps you haven't had? Jitska talked about having conversations, not just within your immediate tribe, your team, but within Adobe Enterprise, Adobe, different areas within Adobe. Who could you talk to that's not within your immediate tribe? And where does your fear of the awkwardness of the conversation actually get in the way of you having it and opening up and you building new relationships, learning information, coming up with greater collaboration, all of those things. So be willing to embrace discomfort. Just very quickly, kind of going through with you a little bit of the neuropsychology around why we don't. One, we tend to overestimate the risks. We actually, as I said, by about twice. We're twice as sensitive to potential risks. Second, we tend to catastrophize those consequences. What'll happen? I remember when my very first book, Find Your Courage, came out, I got really nervous. I was kind of just felt like I'm going to be exposed as the world's worst author. I felt so inadequate. I was like, I'm no J.K. Rowling. I was really passionate. I am really passionate about my work, but I was like, but what if I don't write this, book? And people go, what a terrible book. And I remember waking up one time, a few weeks before it came out, in the middle of the night, and in my mind's eye was the front page of the New York Times. It was my photo. And it just had this massive headline that said, world's worst author. Now, let's face it, that would have been really good publicity. But our imagination sometimes scare us into going, oh, I'm not even going to start. I'm not even going to try and do this. So just be mindful. You can get put into fear casting, worst case scenarios that in reality would never happen. We also tend to underestimate ourselves. We discount the cost of inaction, and we often protect the status quo. We stick with how things are. We tell ourselves a story, it's not so bad. Hopefully it'll all just sort itself out. But actually, if you don't take action on something that you really know you want to take action on, but it's all just a bit too hard, think about how you'll feel down the track, because we pay a steep hidden tax for playing it too safe, for not doing the brave thing, for not getting outside our comfort zone. So with that, I want you to think about, where do you need to, as John Wayne said, get back on the horse? Feel afraid, but saddle up anyway. This is a photo of me from my childhood. It was actually my 10th birthday, and my dad got a horse. And my little sister broke her arm that day just to upstage me. That's my little brother on the horse. And I remember looking up at him going, oh my gosh, he's so big. I didn't really know how to ride. But every single day before school, my school had about 15 kids in it, I would get out there and I would bridle him up and saddle him up, and I would just practice and practice and practice. And over time, I got better and better at riding. Courage is a muscle. It's also a learnable skill. And the more often you practice doing the things that scare you, doing the things that are uncomfortable, the less uncomfortable they become. And so I say, train the brave. Every day, if you were doing something brave, a year from now, you could do amazing things. If every day you said, I'm going to do something today, even though it's uncomfortable. I'm going to reach out to someone. I'm going to set up a Zoom chat right now. I'm going to put forward this idea. I'm going to, fill in the blank. What would it be? I encourage you to think about, what would you be doing? And with that, prioritizing those things that help you bring your bravest self to your work every day. So physically, what does it take for you to feel at your best? Mentally, to be focused. Emotionally, to feel connected and confident, to put those doubts in their place. And spiritually, to be connected to a cause, a sense of purpose that's meaningful for you, something bigger than yourself. Because when you're operating from that place, you can do extraordinary things. You can shatter through any glass ceiling you've got in your head, any glass cage that we put ourselves in. And so I encourage you to operate from the belief that you've got this, to trust yourself that whatever happens, you've got this. Focus on what you want, not on what you don't, and put yourself out there, because I know that you can have a way bigger impact when you do that. Thank you.
Margie, that is superb. Oh my gosh, I feel like 10 inches taller. Okay, now we understand a few of you are getting some error messages. Please bear with us. Our technical team are working on it, but don't worry, we can still see your comments. Now, I have 1,000 questions, but sadly, we don't have much time. But one thing I really want to know is this. Superlatives tend to be soaked into an organization as defining the people who work. Brilliant, assertive, etc. Are there an alternative set of words that we can use rather than just simply focusing on superlatives and still get the best out of people?
Yeah, to me, it's all about the behaviours that people engage in, not the outcomes. And so I know you've got 2 kids, Nihal, I've got kids, talking about the kind of behaviours, like I just like really framing people through what are the behaviours we want to see more of versus them being a genius. Because that's actually a really restrictive, pretty awful thing to put on you. It's like, if I've got to live up to being a genius all the time, I'm not going to do things. If I think I have to be brilliant all the time, heck, I'm going to hold back from doing anything unless I think it's going to be 100% brilliant. So I think always encouraging the behaviors that you want to see more of in other people and that you want to have as values in your team or in the culture of your organization. And of course, I believe courage is the number one value we really need to be gravitating around right now in the midst of so much uncertainty.
We haven't got long left. Just very quickly, how do you make yourself seen and heard if it's not your natural disposition? You're not the one who puts your hand up first in the class.
Don't wait to feel, it might not be, but don't wait to feel confident. Just do that. Put it up anyway, because the fact is, if you're not speaking up, putting your hand up, contributing, people are being deprived of your value. And sometimes we can kind of put a little label on our head that says, well, I'm an introvert and I'm shy, or you know what? If that's getting in the way of you adding maximum value and sharing your contribution, which is always valuable, then do it anyway. And don't let the label that you might put on yourself as, oh, I tend to be this way, get in the way of you having the behaviors that would ultimately help you be more successful and actually really amplify the success of your team too.
Oh, Margie, superb. Thank you so much for today. That has been so useful, like vital, not just for me, by the way, not just for me, not just about me. I'm sure it's been vital for so many people that are listening now, whether that be Katya in Munich, hi Katya, Lauren in Australia, we've got Dan in London, we've got Megani, we've got Divya, we've got Kenichi, we've got Shruti, we've got Frank. People from all over the world are listening to what you have to say, and I'm sure have been inspired by it. I know I certainly have.